The Deathworld was catalogued long before it was ever understood. A blue and green sphere spinning through hostile space under the cold scrutiny of alien instruments that trembled at its readings. Gravity heavier than standard, tectonics in constant violence. Oceans capable of swallowing continents, and an atmosphere thick with corrosive storms marked it as a place no civilized species would ever evolve upon. Yet it burned with life, dense and aggressive, each ecosystem locked in endless competition. To the Galactic Concord, Earth was not a home, but a warning, a living testament to everything that should not exist. High above the planet, the diplomatic vessel Radiant Accord hovered at the edge of orbital safety, its hull shimmering with adaptive shields as electromagnetic turbulence lashed against it. Observers gathered behind translucent alloy windows, their forms varied and delicate, evolved for peace, stability, and predictability. They watched continents fracture under lightning storms that stretched from horizon to horizon, watched oceans churn with kilometer-wide waves, watched tectonic scars bleed molten fire into the sky. This was the cradle of humanity, and already the Concord feared what such a world must carve into its children. The decision to send an envoy had not been unanimous. Many argued that no treaty could bind a species forged under such conditions, that survival itself had trained them to deceive, endure, and dominate. Others insisted diplomacy was safer than ignorance. In the end, fear made the choice. A living treaty would be forged, one human bound by ancient Concord law, constrained by ritual and observation, isolated from the warlike instincts the galaxy believed defined them. Commander Elias Rourke stood alone on the launch platform as the sky tore itself apart above him. The shuttle screamed through turbulent air, its engines fighting gravity that had never forgiven weakness. Rourke did not look impressed. He had been born beneath heavier skies, had trained in environments where failure meant death and hesitation meant extinction. His body bore the quiet adaptations of Earth, dense bones, scarred skin, a heartbeat steady, even as thunder shattered the clouds overhead. To the watching aliens, his stillness was unsettling, an absence of visible fear that registered as emotional deficiency rather than discipline. First contact protocols unfolded with ceremonial precision. Holographic emissaries projected themselves into the storm, their voices translated into human language with careful neutrality. They spoke of peace, of shared futures, of mutual restraint. Rourke listened without interruption, rain striking his exposed uniform like shrapnel, wind threatening to tear the platform apart. He offered no bow, no flourish, only acknowledgement. The Concord delegates noted this with quiet concern, logging it as cultural arrogance rather than environmental indifference. As the shuttle doors sealed and lifted from Earth's surface, instruments aboard the Radiant Accord flared with warnings. Microbial contamination attempted to breach filters. Radiation spikes from the planet's magnetosphere battered the ship. Gravity differentials strained structural fields. Each system screamed what the aliens already knew, that this world was hostile by nature, and that anything born from it carried that hostility within. They watched as Rourke stepped aboard their vessel without assistance, his gait unaltered by artificial gravity that left lesser beings disoriented. Within the observation chamber, scholars and tacticians debated the human quietly. He lacked visible weapons. His neural scans showed stress tolerance far beyond acceptable parameters. His immune response attacked benign probes as if they were threats. Still, he smiled at times, a brief expression that unsettled those who witnessed it. The Concord reassured itself that laws were chains stronger than muscle, that ritual could cage instinct, that intelligence bred under constant danger could be redirected with structure. Yet as the vessel turned away from Earth, a final image lingered on the screens. A storm system large enough to swallow continents bloomed across the planet's surface, lightning tracing violent patterns like neural activity across a living brain. Rourke stood watching it through the viewport, hands clasped behind his back, posture relaxed. The aliens mistook nostalgia for resignation. They did not understand that predators never feared the storm that made them, and as the Radiant Accord accelerated into the dark unease spread silently through its halls. For something from that Deathworld had boarded their ship, and it was no longer contained. The Concord archivists recorded the departure as a success, yet their biometric readings betrayed them. Heart rates elevated across species, pheromone markers spiked, and predictive models refused to stabilize. Rourke was escorted through corridors designed for fragile frames, walls adorned with murals of ancient unity and wars long forgotten. He brushed his fingers along the alloy as he passed, feeling vibration, pressure, subtle imperfections. Mapping a foreign environment the way his ancestors once mapped caves and jungles, cameras tracked his movement, expecting curiosity, finding instead calculation. In the command spire, senior observers discussed containment. The human was bound by law, by honor, by distance from his kind. They reminded one another that he had agreed willingly, that no fleet followed, that Earth had accepted the terms without resistance. This compliance was celebrated as a victory of diplomacy, proof that even Deathworlders could be civilized. None noticed how often Rourke studied emergency bulkheads, how quickly he memorized evacuation routes, how his breathing synchronized with the ship's engine cycles. Outside the hull, space stretched silent and indifferent. Inside, something old stirred. The Concorde had crossed half the galaxy to prevent a future war, never considering that by bringing a human aboard. They had invited the logic of a death world into a civilization unaccustomed to fear. Rourke paused at the threshold of his assigned quarters and looked back once, meeting the gaze of an observing alien whose frills tightened in instinctive alarm. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The door sealed between them, and in that moment, far from Earth's storms, the first true tension of the treaty took hold, coiled and waiting as unseen systems recalibrated, and every predictive model quietly began to fail simultaneously, everywhere now. The radiant Accord carried its guests deeper into civilized space, and with every light year the ship's caretakers felt their confidence erode. Commander Elias Rourke adapted too quickly. Gravity shifts that sent attendants grasping for rails merely altered his stride. Nutrient rations calibrated for docile species were consumed without complaint, though his metabolic readings forced repeated recalibration. Medical staff whispered as his body rejected mild sedatives and neutralized pathogens engineered to be harmless, and the word Deathworld began to circulate not as a classification, but as a warning. Rourke learned the ship the way one learned terrain before a hunt. He listened to the hum of conduits and the rhythm of shield cycling, watched crew traffic during simulated emergencies, noted which species froze when alarms sounded and which fled. He asked polite questions about safety procedures and evacuation drills, and the answers revealed more than the speakers intended. To the Concorde, danger was theoretical. To Rourke, it was a constant companion, and the difference showed in the way his attention never truly rested. The first conflict came without weapons. Pressure failure ruptured a secondary habitat ring during routine translation, a malfunction the engineers insisted was impossible. Atmospheric bleed triggered automated seals, trapping hundreds in a narrowing pocket of air. Concorde protocols dictated waiting for specialist teams, carefully coordinated and slow. Rourke was already moving, using emergency masks designed for lighter lungs, forcing his way through maintenance access that bent under his weight. He did not ask permission. He did not panic. He calculated. Alien observers watched in disbelief as he crawled through collapsing corridors, bracing failing bulkheads with scavenged supports, directing civilians with sharp gestures and fewer words. He rationed oxygen by instinct, by feel, not by algorithm.
Act!
When rescue finally arrived, survivors clung to him in shock, their gratitude confused with fear. The official report credited automated systems. The private logs recorded something else entirely, a human operating comfortably inside chaos. Word spread through the Accord, then through the Concorde's networked consciousness. The human had saved lives without violating a single treaty clause. He had used no weapon, issued no command, yet outcomes bent around him. Scholars argued semantics, strategists recalculated threat models. The models failed again. Rourke's presence changed probabilities in ways the Concorde could not quantify. Resistance followed understanding. Security cadre, sanctioned to test containment parameters, confronted Rourke in a transit nexus. Their forms were tall and crystalline, exoskeletal limbs humming with non-lethal force fields. They demanded compliance checks, posture correction, biometric submission. Rourke complied until the moment one stepped too close, its field destabilizing under the ship's gravity fluctuations. He caught it as it fell, absorbing the impact, setting it upright with controlled strength. The gesture was respectful. The cadre recoiled anyway. That night's cycle, the Accord simulated a fire drill. It became something else. Power flickered, temperature dropped, and fear rippled through species unaccustomed to discomfort. Rourke moved through the darkness like a memory, guiding groups toward safety, his voice steady, his endurance unremarkable by Earth standards and miraculous by theirs. He went without heat, without rest, without complaint. System stabilized, he was still on his feet. The Concord convened an emergency council. They spoke of boundaries and optics, of the necessity to remind the human of his place. They proposed isolation, sensory deprivation softened by diplomacy. Rourke accepted the transfer to a restricted sector with a nod, carrying nothing with him. In confinement, he exercised against increased gravity, monitored his pulse, and waited. He waited because patience was also a weapon, and because predators survived lean seasons by conserving energy. Isolation bred miscalculation. An extremist cell, fearing the human as an omen, breached the restricted sector. They intended to frighten, to provoke a violation they could justify. They underestimated the silence. Rourke heard them before sensors flagged intrusion, felt vibration through the deck, tasted the change in recycled air. When the lights cut, he did not flinch. He used shadow and timing, redirecting momentum, disarming without injury, turning panic back upon its source. By the time security arrived, the cell was contained, restrained by their own devices. The recordings circulated despite attempts at suppression. No blood, no broken law. Only a human enduring conditions meant to break him and turning them into advantage. The Concord felt something they had not felt in generations. The creeping realization that survival on a Deathworld did not breed savagery alone, but clarity. Rourke was not escalating. He was revealing. As the Accord approached its destination, a core world of fragile beauty. The air grew tight with anticipation and dread. Rourke stood once more at a viewport, watching stars stretch and settle, his reflection layered over alien fear. He was bound by diplomacy, contained by ritual, yet every trial sharpened him. Somewhere ahead waited a civilization that believed itself prepared, and somewhere within the ship, alarms rested silent, unaware that the human had already mapped the failures that would wake them soon. The destination world glittered on approach, engineered seas, calm and predictable, continents shaped by design rather than collision. The Concord praised such harmony as progress. Rourke noted the absence of scars, considered what happened when systems built for comfort met the unexpected, when predators tested defenses optimized for peace. In the quiet before arrival, crew avoided his gaze, sensing that proximity to him meant proximity to change. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the ship decelerate, muscles ready without conscious command. The human did not smile. Anticipation settled like pressure before a storm. Across the Accord, 1,000 sensors registered stability while something far less measurable tightened and waited beyond charts and protocols and assurances whispered by fearful minds that had never been hunted before, and now sensed the approach of consequences they could not outrun or negotiate or fully understand. Yet as the human breathed steadily and the galaxy unknowingly prepared to test what endurance truly meant, when survival stopped being theoretical for everyone. The core world of Halcyon opened beneath the radiant Accord, like a promise never tested. Oceans smooth as glass, and cities arranged in elegant symmetry, climate controlled to remove surprise from daily life. Rourke felt the artificial gravity settle and knew immediately where it would fail. Joints compensating for uniform pull, inner ear adjusting to the live stability. The Concord delegation prepared ceremonial greetings and projected confidence, yet their pheromones betrayed unease as the human walked among them, eyes tracking exits, shoulders loose, senses awake. Halcyon had never known hunger, never known predators beyond curated parks and archived simulations. Its citizens gathered to see the human envoy as one might observe a relic from a violent age. Rourke offered measured politeness, returning gestures, respecting rituals. Though he noticed how close security screens hovered and how quickly drones repositioned when his gaze lingered. To the Concord, this was prudence. To Rourke, it was a map of fear. The first incident occurred during a reception dome overlooking the sea. Power flickered as Halcyon's weather control grid compensated for a minor solar fluctuation. The dome's temperature dipped, alarms chimed softly, and panic rippled through the crowd. Rourke moved before the chime finished its cycle, steadying a faltering delegate, guiding children toward structural supports, speaking calmly as his breath fogged in the sudden chill. The system corrected within moments, yet the image remained of a human functioning while others froze. Opposition crystallized quickly. A coalition within the Concord argued that the human's influence destabilized social equilibrium, that his presence amplified fear responses and eroded trust in automated governance. They framed containment as protection, convening emergency authority to restrict his movement. Rourke was informed with courtesy and escorted to a residential sector whose comforts were meant to placate. Accepted again, filing away the pattern. When people grow afraid, they tighten rules. When systems tighten, they snap. The attack came masked as maintenance. Halcyon's underlayers housed power arteries and water conduits maintained by autonomous swarms. That night, a human sense learned in trenches and jungles noticed the wrong cadence in the hum. Rourke rose as the first explosion shuddered through the city, decorative towers swaying, seawalls cracking. Automated responses stalled, unable to reconcile simultaneous failures across redundant networks. The city had been optimized against accident, not intent. Rourke ran toward the smoke. Security broadcasts ordered citizens to shelter and wait. He ignored them, vaulting barriers, using debris as cover as secondary blasts tore open streets. Alien attackers emerged from disguised drones, wielding tools repurposed as weapons. Their objective clear to anyone who read chaos as language. Draw the human out, force a violation. Not obliged, redirected civilians through alleys where structures would hold. Shut down conduits with manual overrides no one had touched in generations, turning flood zones into fire breaks. The attackers found him anyway. They were many and lightly armed, confident in numbers and technology. Rourke used the city against them, gravity plates, variable lighting, reflective surfaces that confused targeting. He closed distance without haste, disarming, incapacitating, leaving bodies breathing and afraid. Each movement was economy born of survival, no flourish, no rage. Observers watching delayed feeds felt a collective shock as predictions collapsed yet again. Concord forces arrived late and stunned. They found a human kneeling beside an injured alien, applying pressure, eyes never leaving the shadows. When questioned, Rourke spoke plainly. Halcyon was not prepared for adversaries who adapted. Comfort had dulled reflexes. Redundancy without practice was illusion. His words spread faster than sensors could halt them, carried by survivors who had followed him through smoke and learned trust the old way. The council fractured. Some demanded his immediate removal. Others argued he had saved the city. Rourke listened, said little, then requested temporary authority to organize response drills. Laughter answered him at first, then silence, as casualty projections were displayed with and without his input. Permission followed, reluctant and conditional. Within days, Halcyon changed. Drills became real. Citizens learned to move under stress, to carry weight, to choose between imperfect options. Rourke trained security to expect failure and exploit it. The human did not rule, he taught, and teaching altered the balance of fear. Those who had planned to break him watched their window close. On the seventh night, as repairs continued, sensors detected an incoming fleet running dark at the edge of the system. The attackers had allies. Concord Doctrine hesitated, awaiting confirmation. Rourke stood on a balcony, overlooking a city no longer asleep, muscles coiled, mind already arranging scarce resources. He spoke once into a recorder, message routed toward Earth through channels not meant for urgency. The words were simple, stripped of ceremony, and they carried the weight of a Deathworld, preparing to answer a test it had been waiting for. The fleet's silhouette flickered like a bruise against the stars. Unknown holes designed for intimidation rather than endurance. Concord analysts debated intent while Rourke counted vectors in time. He requested access to orbital infrastructure was denied, then rerouted power locally with the help of technicians who had learned to trust his urgency. Sirens rose and fell. Halcyon felt fear sharpen into purpose. Alien leaders gathered, demanding reassurance. Rourke offered none. He outlined contingencies, evacuation priorities, choke points that turned beauty into defense. Some recoiled at the language. Others listened. The first kinetic strike fell short, intercepted by improvised fields that should not have held. Cheers erupted and died as secondary impacts followed. Rourke did not celebrate. He moved. As the sky burned, Endurance revealed itself not as suffering, but as choice repeated under pressure. Halcyon citizens chose to act, Concord forces chose to adapt. And far beyond polite space, a signal reached Earth and vanished into the dark, carrying with it the truth that diplomacy had reached its edge and survival was about to speak louder than any treaty as ancient instincts aligned across species in the shadow of approaching war, and the night held its breath. The first human ships arrived without ceremony, merging from slip space like scars opening in the dark, hulls blunt and scarred, heat signatures raw and unapologetic. Concord sensors struggled to classify them, unable to reconcile designs that favored redundancy over elegance, armor over aesthetics. Two Halcyon citizens watching the sky, the vessels looked unfinished, predatory, as if built to endure punishment rather than avoid it. Rourke watched from the command tier, face unreadable, shoulders finally easing as familiar transponder codes resolved through interference. Earth had not sent a fleet by Concord standards. It had sent tools, compact carriers, modular escorts, logistics frames, capable of rapid assembly and faster abandonment. Human doctrine unfolded in silence, drones deploying in swarms that adapted mid-flight, networks forming and reforming as if alive. Concord tacticians protested violations of engagement sequence. Human captains acknowledged receipt and continued anyway, prioritizing position and momentum over permission. The hostile fleet reacted with aggression sharpened by disbelief. They expected hesitation, negotiation, displays meant to intimidate. Instead, they met layered defenses that absorbed punishment and redirected force. Gravity traps that turned kinetic weapons inward. Decoys that bled enemy fire into empty space. Rourke coordinated from Halcyon's surface, linking orbital and ground assets, his mind moving faster than the feeds could update. He did not command by rank. He synchronized by intent. Alien observers felt the shift as something physical, or had returned to a civilization that had archived it. Streets emptied not into shelters but into muster points Rourke had insisted upon. Citizens carrying supplies, moving with purpose, learned under stress. The city held as impacts rattled the atmosphere. When a breach finally punched through the shield lattice, human interceptors met it head-on, sacrificing themselves to preserve the greater structure. Concord analysts reeled at casualty acceptance levels they deemed irrational. Humans called it triage. A Concord marshal confronted Rourke, invoking treaty clauses, warning that escalation would dissolve the living agreement. Rourke listened, eyes on the sky, then answered without heat. The treaty existed to prevent extinction. Attackers had already crossed that line. Law that could not adapt to survival was already broken. The marshal recoiled, sensing the truth behind the words. Around them, alien leaders realized the human was not defying diplomacy. He was redefining it under fire. On the ground, enemy infiltrators breached residential sectors, using hostages as shields, expecting restraint. They encountered human marines operating alongside newly trained Concord units, moving room to room with disciplined aggression. Humans absorbed injuries that would fell others, continued to fight, continued to protect. Medics worked in the open, trusting, covering fire, saving alien lives with the same urgency as their own. Shock spread as Halcyon's defenders witnessed humans choose endurance over safety again and again. Rourke descended into the city when command links faltered, boots striking streets still warm from impacts. He coordinated by voice and gesture, rerouting squads, sealing gaps, using the environment with ruthless efficiency. A collapsing tower became a barrier. A flooded plaza became a trap. He bled and kept moving, pain acknowledged and set aside. To those watching, he was not fearless. He was committed. The attackers adapted to, deploying heavier units, targeting human logistics, attempting to break morale. They failed to understand that morale on a Deathworld was forged by surviving worse. Each loss sharpened resolve. Each setback informed the next move. Human ships counterattacked with brutal precision, not chasing glory but erasing capability. The hostile fleet began to fracture, cohesion unraveling under sustained pressure. Above Halcyon, the battle turned. Human carriers repositioned, exposing themselves to draw fire, then collapsing formation to spring traps. Concord forces followed, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence as success bred trust. The sky filled with debris and fire, yet the planet held. When the last enemy flagship attempted retreat, a human vessel crippled it and disengaged, leaving it drifting. Mercy, as strategy unsettled observers more than annihilation would have. Silence fell unevenly. Fires burned. Medics triaged. Leaders convened amid ruin and relief. Rourke stood apart, hands stained, gaze distant. He had broken no law written to preserve life. He had shattered assumptions written to preserve comfort. As reports compiled and casualty lists finalized, a realization spread through the Concord like aftershock. The living treaty had not contained humanity. It had brought humanity's rules into a galaxy that had forgotten them. Far above, Earth ships held position, scarred and steady, awaiting orders that did not come. Rourke looked up, feeling the weight of what followed victory. The law had bent. The next test would decide whether it could endure what humans called peace after war. In council chambers hastily repaired, alien representatives argued in fractured tones. Some demanded withdrawal. Others demanded more humans. Fear and respect braided together. Rourke spoke once, quietly, reminding them that endurance was not domination, and survival was not cruelty. He asked for drills to become permanent, for systems to assume failure as default, for children to learn weight and consequence. The requests sounded extreme to those raised without danger. To those who had lived through the night, they sounded necessary. Signals rippled outward as recordings spread, humans standing in fire beside aliens, refusing to retreat until civilians cleared. The narrative shifted beyond Halcyon. Worlds listened, enemies recalculated, allies reconsidered what protection meant. In the aftermath, exhaustion settled heavy and earned. Rourke finally sat back against a cracked wall, breath steady, eyes closing only long enough to reset. Above, the stars looked unchanged. Below, a civilization had crossed a threshold. The human rose again as new alerts chimed. Not battle this time, but unrest. Political shockwaves, factions moving. Survival had won the night. The consequences would shape the age, and somewhere in the quiet before the next demand, Rourke felt the familiar tightening of readiness, knowing that the galaxy had learned a lesson it could never unlearn, as the cost of peace began to reveal itself in the long shadow of a Deathworld, awakened and humanity watched and waited. The galaxy did not settle after Halcyon. It fractured. Shockwaves of fear and recalculation rippling through systems that had never imagined humans as anything more than a contained anomaly. Trade routes stalled, alliances strained, and border defenses activated with trembling haste. Worlds that had relied on Concord protection now questioned whether that protection had ever been real. Rourke watched the data scroll, exhaustion etched deep but controlled, understanding that survival after victory demanded sharper instincts than survival during battle. The counter-response arrived disguised as diplomacy. Delegations demanded inspections of human ships, limitations on movement, renewed binding of the living treaty. Rourke recognized the pattern instantly. Fear seeks to reassert control through rules. He refused politely, citing damage assessments and recovery protocols, and the refusals were logged as known compliance. Behind closed channels, hostile coalitions mobilized, interpreting restraint as vulnerability, convinced that humanity had overextended itself. The first strike came at the edge of civilized space, a human logistics hub ambushed by forces that believed supply lines were weakness. They underestimated redundancy. When the attack unfolded, human crews executed evacuation and countermeasures with ruthless efficiency. Scuttling assets to deny capture, transmitting battle data in real time, losses were accepted, lessons extracted, and the attackers found themselves traced, tracked, and marked within minutes. To humans, pain was information. Earth responded not with outrage, but with adjustment. Fleets dispersed, doctrine shifting from defense to pressure, from reaction to anticipation. Rourke coordinated across layers, his voice steady even as ours blurred together, body sustained by discipline rather than rest. Alien officers observing him began to understand that endurance was not stubbornness, it was structure, habits built to function when comfort was gone. On a contested moon rich in infrastructure, the next confrontation ignited. Alien forces landed expecting swift dominance, relying on superior numbers and automated command. They met human units dug in with improvised fortifications. Terrain reshaped to favor gravity and line of sight, traps seated where algorithms predicted safety. The fighting was brutal and close. Humans advanced through vacuum and fire, injuries mounting, resolve unbroken. Alien troops faltered as humans continued after wounds that should have ended them, advancing not because they were fearless but because stopping was worse. Rourke deployed reserves sparingly, letting the enemy exhaust itself against prepared defenses. When the counterattack came, it was precise, coordinated across ground and orbit, cutting off retreat and forcing surrender. Prisoners were treated, fed, stabilized. The mercy confused them more than defeat. Stories spread among captured ranks of humans sharing water, of medics prioritizing alien casualties, of enemies who refused to become monsters even when they could. The Concord splintered openly. Some worlds pledged support to humanity, others condemned it as destabilizing. Rourke addressed a fractured council via secure channel, his image gaunt but unyielding. He spoke of Deathworlds not as curses but as teachers, of survival not as domination but responsibility. He warned that pretending danger could be legislated away had brought the galaxy to this edge. Silence followed, heavy and unresolved. The true test came when a coalition fleet bypassed Halcyon and struck toward Earth itself, believing the Deathworld vulnerable without its envoy. Rourke felt the shift immediately, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. He transmitted warnings, redeployed assets, and watched as Earth's orbital defenses came alive, layers revealing themselves only under threat. The attackers broke against gravity wells and kill zones shaped by centuries of conflict, their formations unraveling in a storm that welcomed them with violence and precision. From the surface, storms raged as they always had, indifferent to war. Human cities endured bombardment with practiced resilience, shelters sealed, responders moving through chaos as if born to it. Rourke listened to reports of civilian survival rates that shocked alien analysts, evacuation timelines that defied probability. Earth bent, but did not break. It never had. As the coalition fleet withdrew in tatters, the message was clear. Humanity would not be intimidated, would not be isolated, not be bound again by rules written without understanding. Rourke finally allowed himself a moment, hands resting on the console, eyes closed as the noise receded. He was tired in a way sleep could not fix, aware that each victory carved deeper expectations. Across the galaxy, enemies reconsidered open war. Allies asked for training, for doctrine, for humans to stand beside them. Fear shifted shape, becoming respect in some, resentment in others. Rourke knew the pattern from history written in blood. The apex predator was never left alone for long. As new alerts chimed and projections darkened, he straightened, endurance settling back into place. The galaxy had chosen its path. Humanity would walk it not as conqueror, not as savior, but as what the Deathworld had made it. A species that survived when others faltered. A presence that turned theory into reality, and as the next wave of signals arrived, the quiet certainty spread that the final reckoning was no longer distant, but closing fast. The final convergence did not announce itself with banners or declarations, but with silence that spread across sensors and minds alike. A coordinated withdrawal of hostile fleets followed by sudden acceleration toward a single nexus beyond Concord jurisdiction. Analysts called it a regrouping. Rourke named it a trap, studied trajectories and resource flows. Seeing the pattern of desperation that emerged when predators realized their prey had teeth, Earth Command convened across layered channels. Human and alien representatives sharing space that once would have fractured under mistrust. Rourke spoke with the weight of experience, not authority, outlining the stakes without embellishment. The coalition would strike at the Concord Heartworld simultaneously, forcing humanity to choose between defense and pursuit. A split response would doom both. The solution was not balance but commitment. Human fleets consolidated with startling speed, logistics folding inward, non-essential assets abandoned without regret. Alien officers watched in disbelief as humans discarded months of preparation to gain hours of advantage. On Deathworlds, survival favored those who let go of what slowed them. Rourke ordered a direct pursuit into the Nexus, leaving Concord space seemingly exposed. Panic erupted among allied worlds. He did not soothe it, trusted that clarity would follow action. Rourke led the push toward the weapon core, coordinating multiple teams through interference and loss. He took a hit that cracked armor and burned flesh, pain flaring bright, then controlled. He remembered storms on Earth, remembered learning to stand when standing hurt, and he stood. Around him, humans and aliens fought side by side, trust forged not by words, but by shared survival. In the aftermath, the Concord broadcast a declaration reshaping galactic law. Deathworlds were no longer anomalies to be contained, but partners whose lessons would redefine survival. Humanity was offered a seat not as subject, but as equal. Rourke accepted on behalf of Earth with conditions rooted in hard truth. Training would replace complacency. Preparedness would replace illusion. Peace would be treated as something maintained, not assumed. Rourke returned to Earth briefly, standing beneath open sky as storms rolled in, feeling gravity press familiar and grounding. He was changed, scarred deeper than flesh, carrying the weight of choices that had saved billions and cost thousands. He did not regret them. Predators on Deathworlds learned early that survival demanded sacrifice, and that hesitation killed more surely than action. Across the galaxy, children learned new drills, new stories, new respect for danger. Worlds hardened without losing compassion. Humanity did not rule the stars. It anchored them. And as Rourke prepared to leave again, knowing threats would rise anew, he felt the quiet certainty that the apex predator had been revealed not as a destroyer, but as a guardian shaped by a world that never forgave weakness and never stopped demanding strength. The galaxy would remember the moment fear turned into resolve, when theory shattered against lived endurance. Rourke addressed crews before departure, not with speeches but with presence, moving among them, meeting eyes, sharing silence. He trusted them because trust had been earned the hard way. As fleets dispersed to rebuild and watch, signals of surrender and recalibration poured in. Some enemies vanished into dark space, others sought reconciliation. Humanity answered cautiously, scars still fresh, instincts alert. The Concord began restructuring defenses around human doctrine, drills running until exhaustion, then running again. Rourke took his place once more as envoy and sentinel, bound not by chains, but by responsibility. Understood now that the treaty had evolved into something alive, forged under pressure, strengthened by fire. He carried Earth with him in every choice, the weight of gravity and storm etched into muscle and mind.